It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. My friends and I, Jack, Emily, Sam, and I, had been eagerly planning our hike into the heart of Black Hollow Forest for weeks. It was known for being eerily quiet, but we all laughed it off. People often exaggerated stories around campfires, and we weren't the type to believe in ghost tales. The forest greeted us with towering pines and a thick carpet of moss underfoot. We hiked deeper into the woods, the sun filtering through the canopy, casting strange shadows on the ground. Jack, ever the adventurer, had the map in hand, and Emily, the photographer, kept snapping photos of every bird and wildflower she saw. Sam lagged behind, complaining about the weight of his backpack, but his jokes kept our spirits high. It was a perfect day, even though I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The deeper we ventured, the more the forest seemed to change. The air grew cooler, and the trees seemed to close in on us, their thick branches blocking out the sun. There was an odd stillness, too. Birds ceased their songs, and the usual rustle of wildlife vanished. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, watching us. By the time we set up camp near a small clearing just before sunset, we were all ready for a break. The fog rolled in quickly, as if summoned by some unseen force. It started as a light mist, but it thickened unnaturally fast, creeping in around our campsite like it had a mind of its own. It was as if the very air had turned heavy, pressing down on us. The trees on the edge of the clearing were swallowed by the fog, disappearing completely. We sat around the fire, its flickering light casting long, twisted shadows on the ground. Our voices seemed muffled, like the fog was soaking up our words. The silence was broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire, but even that felt unnatural. Then, the whispering started. At first, we thought it was the wind, just a trick of the breeze moving through the trees, but the whispers didn't sound like wind. They were words. Faint at first, then louder, distinct and unintelligible, weaving through the mist. "Did you hear that?" Jack's voice broke the silence, his eyes darting around the fire. We all nodded, our laughter stuttering and dying in our throats. The whispers circled us, growing louder, closer, like they were right next to us, but we couldn't see a soul. Then, just as suddenly as it started, a voice, my name, was called out, soft and sweet, almost affectionate. I turned quickly, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there, just the fog, thick and unrelenting, pressing in on us. Emily's face went pale. "I saw something," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Something moving out there." She pointed into the fog, but we all strained our eyes and saw nothing. Then came the laughter. It started as a soft giggle, high-pitched, childlike, and far too close. It echoed through the fog, bouncing off the trees and sending chills down my spine. It wasn't human. It was wrong. We all retreated to our tents, laughing uneasily, trying to shake off the tension, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind raced, every creak of the tent or gust of wind sending me into a panic. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a deep, guttural growl. It rumbled through the ground, low and hungry, vibrating the very air. My blood ran cold. Then, the whisper came again, but this time it wasn't a voice I recognized. It was guttural, inhuman, rasping through the fabric of my tent. "Come outside." My heart stopped. I didn't move, frozen in place, not daring to make a sound. Slowly, I unzipped a small corner of the tent, my hands trembling. The fog had thickened, nearly suffocating the campsite, and then I saw it. Figures, writhing shapes, moving through the mist. Not human. No, they were wrong. They were like shadows, distorted and twisting, bending in unnatural ways, as if the fog itself had become alive. I shut the zipper quickly, waking Jack and the others. We scrambled out of our tents, our hearts racing, but as soon as we stepped into the fog, the whispering stopped. It was replaced by an eerie silence, thick and suffocating. The only sound was our breathing, rapid and panicked. We packed up as fast as we could, the fog closing in around us. The path we had walked in on seemed different now, twisted and unfamiliar, and in the distance I thought I saw something, pale fingers, skeletal and long, reaching out of the mist. I blinked, and it was gone. We ran, stumbling through the trees, barely daring to look back. The fog followed us, clinging to us like a predator on our heels. It wasn't until we reached the edge of the forest, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees, that the fog finally dissipated, as if it had never been there. We never spoke about it again. But whatever was in that fog, it wasn't human, and it wasn't friendly. And Black Hollow? I would never set foot there again. It was supposed to be a routine road trip, just me and my best friend, Sarah. We had planned this weekend getaway for months, nothing extravagant, just a quiet drive to a remote town we'd always wanted to visit. But from the moment we entered that stretch of highway near Millstone Ridge, something felt off. The sky was overcast, and the air was thick with humidity. The radio crackled, and no matter what station we tuned into, it was just static. We laughed it off at first, thinking it was just our car. But as we drove deeper into the mountains, we noticed the road signs became fewer, the towns smaller, and the trees darker, as if the world around us was slowly closing in. We passed a small small, old gas station on the side of the road. The building was abandoned, but what caught my eye were the fresh tire tracks leading to it, despite the station being clearly out of business. It was then that Sarah suggested we stop and take a look. Maybe it's an old truck stop, could be interesting. Against my better judgment, we pulled over. The air around us felt dense, as if something was pressing down. We walked into the gas station, the door creaking loudly as we entered. The place was deserted, with dust coating every surface, but it didn't feel empty. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as if someone was watching us. "Let's go," I said, suddenly uneasy. But before we could leave, we heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the back of the store. My heart skipped a beat. I whispered, "Did you hear that?" Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. We backed away, but before we could reach the door, the footsteps stopped. Then the air shifted, cold, biting, like a winter breeze that shouldn't have been there. We heard a voice, so soft it could barely be called a whisper, but it sent chills down my spine. "Get out!" We froze, the voice clear now, unmistakable. It wasn't human. It didn't feel alive. The floorboards creaked behind us. I turned slowly, and in the corner of the room, I saw it, a figure. It was tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes, its skin pale and stretched too tight. It was wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to someone from another time, outdated, old-fashioned, and dirty. "Sarah," I gasped, "we need to leave, now!" But the door wouldn't open. The figure took a step toward us, its mouth curling into a sickening grin. "We're not done yet," it whispered, its voice cold and hollow. Suddenly, the whole room seemed to shift. The walls seemed to melt, and the floor dropped beneath us. We were falling through endless darkness. And then, the red mist appeared, thick, suffocating, filling the space like it was alive. We struggled to breathe, to scream, but the mist clung to us, choking us. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figure, standing in the mist, watching us with empty eyes. When I woke up, we were back on the highway, as if nothing had ever happened, but the tire tracks from the gas station were gone. There was no trace of the place, just the road, the sky, and the oppressive silence. Sarah didn't remember anything, but I know what I saw, and I know that the red mist is still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to stumble across that cursed road. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend hike with my best friend Josh. We had decided to hit the trails at Pine Ridge, a place neither of us had been to before but had heard good things about. The trail was long, winding through thick woods with little more than occasional breaks for views of distant mountains. We weren't worried. It was a public trail, well-trodden, and safe, but looking back, I should have known something was wrong from the start. The hike was beautiful at first, tall trees, the fresh smell of pine, and the sound of birds overhead. We made our way deeper into the forest, chatting about everything and nothing. Max, Josh's dog, was running ahead, sniffing every tree and bush along the way as usual. After a couple of hours, we reached a quiet clearing where we took a break. Josh pulled out a bottle of water, and I sat down on a nearby rock to catch my breath. That's when I noticed it, a man, standing at the edge of the clearing. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, though he didn't seem to belong. He was far too still, just standing there watching us. At first, I thought maybe he was another hiker, but something about the way he stared at us felt wrong. The look on his face was blank, no greeting, no acknowledgement that we were there, just an empty stare. "Josh," I whispered, nudging my friend. "Look." Josh turned to follow my gaze and immediately stood up. "Who the hell is that?" The man didn't move. He just kept watching us, his eyes unblinking, unmoving. We exchanged a quick glance. Neither of us knew what to do. We'd been in the woods for hours, but this was the first time we'd seen another person. Something didn't sit right with us. It felt like we were being watched. We quickly packed up our things, trying to avoid drawing attention to ourselves. I kept glancing back at the man, who had finally started to walk away, but slowly, deliberately. His movements were unnervingly calm, almost too controlled. "Let's go," I said, a knot forming in my stomach. We started walking back toward the main trail, keeping our pace steady but tense. It wasn't until we reached a bend in the trail that we heard something, footsteps behind us. I looked back, expecting to see Max chasing after us, but he was still with Josh. The footsteps were growing louder, coming closer, but there was no one in sight. "Josh, are you hearing this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, someone's following us." We quickened our pace, trying to make sense of what was happening. I turned down a side trail, hoping to lose whoever was behind us, but no matter how fast we moved, the footsteps stayed close, just out of sight, like someone was deliberately keeping their distance. After a few minutes, we stopped in our tracks. There was no noise, no movement, just silence. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. We waited, listening intently, and then I heard a whisper. "Keep walking," a voice muttered, low and harsh. It wasn't Josh, and it wasn't Max. We froze, unable to move. The voice was coming from just behind us, too close, as if the man from the clearing had followed us, and now he was right there, in the woods with us. Josh reached for his phone, but it slipped from his hand, landing on the dirt with a muffled thud. He cursed under his breath, leaning down to pick it up. The footsteps continued, almost mocking, but closer now. "Who is it? What do you want?" Josh called out, his voice shaking. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the voice came again. this time with a strange chuckle. "Just keeping you company." Suddenly, I heard a rustle from behind a tree. It was too close, too real. My gut told me that the man had been following us the entire time. Without thinking, I grabbed Josh's arm, pulling him away from the path. We ran, not caring about the trail anymore. We just needed to get out. We sprinted for what felt like miles until we finally reached the end of the trail. The parking lot was ahead. The car was in sight. We didn't look back. When we finally got to the car, we were out of breath, but we didn't feel safe until we were on the road, miles away from the woods. We didn't say much for a while. Both of us were too shaken up. We just kept driving, not stopping until we reached the nearest town. The police never found anyone in the area, and no one was reported missing. I don't know who that man was or why he was out there, but I do know one thing for sure. He wasn't lost. He was waiting for us. To this day, when I think back to that day in the woods, I can still hear his voice in my head, "Just keeping you company."